Hi, I'm Brian Russell. Welcome back to class. This is an Ask Me Anything, and I'm using the questions that were generated from the reflection papers that you all turned in on David Thompson's book, Bible Study That Works, and the Bauer Traina Inductive Bible Study. And so I've kind of condensed the questions. Some of them I've used word for word, but I've tried to answer essentially at least the spirit, at least the way I was interpreting the questions of all the ones that were on the papers. And let me just say a couple of things right off the top. The first is this: relax, take a deep breath, and remember the process. If you go back to the introductory video I created and shot, I did give a warning about information overload, especially of the Inductive Bible Study book. The only thing I really wanted you to get out of that was to see the overarching framework, and that was also in some of the videos that I created. So just remember the process. We're going to learn step by step as we go through this. You will probably be able to use the Bauer Traina book for the rest of your life, and I would recommend rereading that about once every year, and it will get better and better and clearer the more you work with Inductive Bible Study. For most of this class, you really simply need to rely on my instructions, my video content, and the handouts that I will be giving you. Now, as far as a position, some of you indicated some skepticism about even using human reason to interpret the scripture. There's not a lot to say about that other than I think the stance that we take when we come to the biblical text always needs to be, I'm open to being astonished by what I find there. And God's given us minds. We have the work of the Spirit in our lives, and we have a vast amount of resources that we can look at, but your job is to come to the text, essentially not assume that you know what it already means, and be open to being astonished by the depths of the scriptures. I like to use a analogy of the ocean. The Bible is like an ocean. And when you go to the beach, you don't, if you want to sit on the beach and read what somebody else says about the text, fine. But it'd be better to dip your toes in, get knee deep, waist deep, over your head, or actually take a deep dive all the way into the depths of the deepest parts of the ocean, like the Mariana Trench, for example. So be open to being astonished and be open to growing and enhancing what you already know about Scripture, and you'll love Inductive Bible Study. As I've said also, I think in the introductory video, I would trade my entire Master of Divinity class in just for the Inductive Bible Study class that I took there at Asbury. And I ended up taking 5 IBS classes, plus I did an independent study. And so that was like my favorite part of the seminary journey. So be open to astonishment. Now, again, problems reading these books. Bible Study That Works is easy. And if it makes you feel better or maybe worse, Dr. Thompson wrote that for lay people, that he used to use that book to teach inductive Bible study to lay people at weekend retreats. So that's definitely just almost like a Dr. Seuss version of IBS. But the strength of that is it gives you the framework. Now, Dr. Bauer and Dr. Traina are the real masterminds, and that book says comprehensive, and they aren't kidding on that one. And so what we want to look for in this class is somewhere between those two books as you move from, again, unconscious incompetence or conscious incompetence to at least becoming consciously competent about how you deal with a text. So don't worry if you struggled with the text. Again, the Bauer Traina book is more of a reference text now that you've read through it quickly. Don't get bogged down in the details. It's the big overarching method that you want to have a look at. Also remember that interpretation is both art and science. So there are rules, but if you're just a rules-based person, you're going to be frustrated doing exegesis because texts are different. There's different genres. There's different types of literature. They were written over a 1,000-year period. And so I could give you, and I will, there's some principles. I would call them principles rather than rules. and there's tools that we can use, but there's always going to be art because you have to be able to decide what are the best tools to use for a given passage. For example, in this class, we're always going to be doing really close, detailed observations on the text. That includes survey, but we're also going to take even a deeper dive, and we're going to do detailed observation in a couple of weeks. We'll be working on that in our face-to-face sessions. Yeah, and by the way, I should say, when we come to our face-to-face work, I'm going to run those as workshops. So, you're going to practice survey in advance of that, and maybe a little bit of detailed observation, but we're going to work on those key skills. So when you finish up the face-to-face portion of the class, you'll be ready to do the work for the rest of the semester. So again, remember, it's art and science. There's rules, there's methods, there's tools. Like, for example, one person noted even something like, will every main unit have a subunit? And generally the answer is yes, but if your main unit is just a verse or two, there's no point in splitting one verse into subunits. So you have to kind of have a feel for that and recognize when a principle or rule is helpful and when it's not, and that comes with experience. So again, relax, take a deep breath, remember the process. Now, a few persons asked really hard questions about it. Induction, like things like, I thought the Bible could interpret itself, or being skeptical about human reason. Well, here's the deal. We have two ways you can come to the scriptures. You can already decide that you know what it means, and that puts you or your community of faith as the judge over the Bible. Or we can come to the scripture open to what it means and use the rules of evidence to challenge our assumptions. Like, for example, the difference between induction or deduction would be going to, you pick it and bringing your assumptions to the text and making sure that the text fits perfectly with your theology that you already have. That's a deductive approach. For example, let's say we're in Exodus, which we won't be in this class, but I do teach a course on Exodus, and we're studying Pharaoh's hard heart. If you're a Wesleyan Arminian, you probably don't like it that parts of the text say the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart. If you're a really good Calvinist, you probably don't like the parts of Exodus that say Pharaoh hardened his heart. So the text basically has these two positions, and we end up getting in debates on free will, and it's really easy just to bring our theology to make the text in Exodus say what it is, whereas an inductive approach looks at all the available evidence and is going to put together an interpretation that makes the best sense of all of the evidence, some of which may be conflicting. So it's important to just commit yourself that the text is going to be allowed to say or mean whatever the evidence leads us to, or what conclusion the evidence leads us to, especially and particularly when it pushes in on some of our own cherished beliefs, because basically biblical authority isn't just a statement that you make. Someone else was asking about infallibility. Biblical authority isn't a creedal position merely. It's a way of life. And you'll know how authoritative the Bible is in your life to the extent that when your personal experience doesn't match up with what the Scripture appears to be saying, that you go with what the Scripture says. So I'm more interested in our actual response to the passages that challenge us than I am to ones that it's easy to go along with. Like I joke, I'm an Old Testament professor, and I love the Old Testament because I almost never break any of the laws in the Old Testament. My ox doesn't gore anybody. I don't boil baby goats in mother's milks. I don't have an Asherah pole. These are pieces of cake for me. But the parts of the Bible that are challenging for me are the ones that actually speak directly into my life and challenge me on how I'm living. So just commit to evidence. That's all induction means, is that you're committed to following the evidence. And by the way, those of you who are worried about being really wrong, this is the great place to be wrong. Would you rather be wrong in a seminary classroom or be wrong when you stand up and preach or teach to people that are desperate to hear a good word, right? The other piece is the method isn't just us interpreting apart from a community. What we'll be using, we're going to be focusing on learning skills, bringing our own interpretations, but as you'll see, we are going to be bringing in commentaries and other resources that can help to check and make sure that we're on the right track. But the philosophy of induction isn't really up for debate in this class unless you can bring an even better way of reading the Bible, and then you're almost obligated to share it so that we can change our entire hermeneutical approach here at the seminary. And because we're inductive, if you come up with a better way, I'm all ears, so please bring it. What assumptions, presuppositions do we bring to the text? There's lots, right? We bring assumptions and presuppositions based on our theology, our age, our ethnicity, our gender, our social economic position, our political position, our essential demeanor, whether we're kind of a half full person or a half empty person. All of those things both help us to see certain things in the text and also blind us to certain things in the text. That's again why a commitment to evidence, induction, is critical. We'll talk more about the assumptions and presuppositions when we get to the class, but the critical piece is this: you have to recognize that we all have biases, everybody, and as long as you know that and don't pretend that you have none, you'll be able to work through your assumptions and presuppositions. Okay, now I want to answer some sorts of nuts and bolts questions about IBS. How do we utilize outlines in this method? Are outlines good, bad, or indifferent? I presume that this question came as a response to all the charts that Bauer, Traina, and even Thompson to some ways included. And there's different ways of doing charts, and if you find charts helpful, and I will model some charts, then you should go for it. If you find just creating an outline, and so you can, and we're talking about main units and subunits, so you can use an outline in the same way that you would use a chart. It just kind of turns on your learning style, whether or not you're a visual person. My own personal preference is I like outlines, but as you can see, I will model and use charts in class because I think charts are useful. So you just have to work through that. But what isn't optional, and this is part of the survey assignment, is you have to locate main units, subunits, and then talk about the structures. But you can do that with either a chart, which would go horizontal or vertical, or with just a good old-fashioned outline. They're both. All those options are fine. Bauer's text gives incredible detail of the process. Do you go into as much depth as the text when you study a passage? Well, that depends. It turns on how much time you have. Now, let me say two things. You don't want to be intimidated by what Bauer, Traina do in their text. They're trying to be a model of what is possible. David Bauer was my own personal instructor, and I did have met Dr. Traina. Well, he passed away a couple of years ago, but I met him several times after I became a professor, and they both had incredible minds, right? So they kind of show you what's possible, and so you're not going to achieve those types of results immediately, so don't judge yourself by those. Jordan Peterson, in his book, 12 Rules for Life, has a really helpful principle. He says, don't compare yourself to anybody other than the person that you were yesterday. So you want to get better every day, but you can use these other things as targets. So look at my work. My work, by choice, I don't keep piling extra stuff into my interpretations every single time I teach that. I try to keep it comprehensive enough that it can push you all to see what's possible. But I also want it to be still simple enough that you can see how I do what I do, because that's really the critical piece. Then the last thing I'd want to say about this question is time, or your work will be exponential related to time as you get better. So in other words, what might take you 4 hours or even 8 hours this semester, in a year or two, if you continue to practice regularly, and that's the key thing, is intentional practice. You can use this immediately in your context. If you practice IBS a couple years down the road, and it may not even take that long, you'll be getting 10 times more done in even an hour than you were able to do this semester in 4 hours. So you can mark my words on that because it's true. I can get a ton of stuff done in a short time, which then leads to the next question. How much time can they realistically give to inductive Bible study? Again, that depends on your context, but you should be able to go to have a pretty substantive sermon going from zero to sermon in roughly 8 to 10 hours, which would include doing a block of inductive Bible study and working it all the way from, starting with the text all the way to application. So yes, you can do this on a weekly basis. I did this when I was a pastor. And I know lots of Asbury grads who essentially are applying some form of inductive Bible study each week. So your learning of the method this semester doesn't necessarily, is not really indicative of the amount of time you might have to do this. So, but the answer is yes. Okay, I would love to have a clear diagram or outline of the steps to follow as I study. Do you know if one exists? Yeah, they exist. You can look at the opening videos where I introduce IBS. There is an outline. There's also going to be rubrics that you can follow. And if you just look, like for example, this week you're working on a survey of 1 to 17. The instructions for how to do the survey, those steps, that's the steps you're looking for. And we'll have that for essentially each step. And if you look at the bigger video that I created on overviewing the whole method, you can essentially see the steps there too. Okay, a really specific question. When identifying general materials, how can one best discern finding the one central component of an entire book? And then there's an example here given of the Gospels. So and the person notes that there's geography, there's ideology, there's chronology, there's biography. In cases such as the Gospel, is the assumption to be that the Gospels are meant to be read biographically? Well, notice also that the best way to answer this is the general materials of a whole book. You're going to have examples in most cases of all of the various possibilities. As in induction, you go with the one that has the most examples. Now, are the Gospels to be read as biographies? Yes and no. Several of the Gospels are obviously examples of ancient biography, right? And so, like, for example, Matthew is biographical. It's about the person of Jesus. But if you look at John's Gospel, obviously it's about Jesus, but it's actually organized chronologically. And so sometimes scholars will argue that John is organized chronologically, just for examples. And again, general material in sense is just to give you a bigger picture of what's going on. And you can always change your mind after you've done your exegetical work in IBS. The biggest question that I have of this method of biblical studies, which I know was touched on in the Bauer Traina text, is how well this method works in critical analysis of should have been text, I cut that off. Now, this is a broader question of how IBS relates to other exegetical methods. And the way I like to describe this is that inductive Bible study is like an umbrella method, and essentially all true observations and tools that can give us insight into the text fit under that rubric. So if you're talking about critical analysis, and I'm assuming you're talking about historical critical methods like source criticism, form criticism, redaction criticism, those types of insights can be brought right into inductive Bible study. The difference between what we teach at Asbury, how we do hermeneutics, and say how you might have done this at a different seminary or how you would do this at a different seminary, is that we start inductively with a study of the text itself, and then we would go and try to see the insights of some of these other scholarly methods, but we use our own close reading of the final form of the text as the basis for bringing in additional resources as needed. We'll touch base on this in our class time too. So that was the final question. If you have others, you can post them in the discussion center. It's a real privilege to have you in class. I appreciate your questions and the opportunity to answer some of those. Look forward to meeting everybody in person, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.